Like at one point, I found myself shifting from just being very secluded, just writing my emails and mailing, sending my ads out, etc., to actually bringing in more people into my world through joint ventures and things like that. It required doing calls, and very quickly, within a few months, I discovered that a call is a draining experience for me. Like I can invest 2 hours into writing copy, and that won't be as draining for me as having a 1 hour phone call with somebody for some reason. So, I noticed that whenever I would do calls in the morning, it would totally kill the rest of my day. Like you said, like you don't want to do heavy lifting with your brain.
Yeah.
So that was me. Like by 11 o'clock, I'm like a vegetable. I want to go watch football or something. So the way I addressed that is I shifted my schedule to do calls later in the day. So I would do my copywriting in the morning, or reading in the morning, and then I would do the calls after lunch, because after lunch I was feeling down anyway. I was like heavy. So I would do the calls and I would push through the calls, and I didn't feel guilty anymore for not being productive that day.
That's interesting. Is it all calls?
All calls. Every
Wow.
Sales call, coaching call, interview call, meeting with a team member. And it doesn't have to be about business either. Like if I have a phone call with a property management company, or if I have a phone call where I'm like talking to a lawyer about my traffic ticket that I want to cancel out,
Right.
it can be anything at all. So I pushed all the calls to the afternoon, because I would just not pick up the phone in the morning, just period. I was so protective of my morning hours. Yo, it's Igor. I want you to have my Amazon best-selling book for free for taking the time to listen to my podcast and to watch my YouTube videos. Now, I'm not only going to give you this book for free, but I'm going to throw in about $3.2 thousand in free bonuses. Now, if you want to get this book, please click the link in the description, or you can also go to igorsbook.com. And now, back to the podcast.
People's energy is infectious for me. And so if I'm talking to people who are up and high energy, I tend to feel up and have high energy too. And if I'm talking to someone who is down and low energy, generally they will take me down and low energy, right?
Okay.
So for me, like I'm careful with who I talk to and when, like, because there are a lot of people I can talk to in the morning that actually like make me like the conversation is empowering and charging, like, but then there are people that like, yeah, I have to make at the end of the day, because like I don't want that, I don't want that vibe. But and for me, it's like noticing who, where that person kind of lays for me, and
yeah, absolutely.
And
yeah.
But I do think that I used to, when I used to do a lot of coaching, I coach today, but I coach like 20 private clients. It's not like hundreds of people, right? And when I was coaching hundreds of people, and it was a mixture of group plus some one-on-one, my schedule was slammed, right? Like I think at the most I ever had was like close, I think it was like 187 clients. And so each
Private
one gets
clients?
a half an hour. What?
Private clients?
Well, group/private. So they all got private time with me. So a half an hour every other week. So I was doing like 50 hours a week. And and to do that many people, like I'm not prepping before the call, right? Like I can't, right?
Yeah.
And each call's a half an hour. And it's the onus is on them to get from me what they most need, right? And so the first call generally never would go well for people. They wouldn't know how to maximize the time. But by the second and third call, they did. And part of the reason, like, for that was, as an entrepreneur, you need to know what questions you need to get answered, like always. And, a lot of I can trace back a lot of my success to knowing what those questions were. And then when I had the opportunity to get a question answered, I did, right? So like, even in my previous business, before I got online, I had a hypnosis center that grew into a chain of hypnosis centers. And And I was convinced that, I don't know if this guy was ever well known up in Canada, but in New York, where I grew up, he was Cy Sperling, who was not only he was not only the president of Hair Club for Men, he was also a client, and then his thing blew away. And so these were ads that were all over the place. And he took hair replacement back in 80s and 90s, I guess, and made it from a cottage industry of just little places doing it, and turned it into a company that was advertising and offering this. And to me, that was the closest thing to what I was offering in hypnosis, which was also taking it from a cottage industry and making it more professional. And I ended up being on a panel with him at some point for Early to Rise. And so I got a chance to meet him, and I offered to take him out for lunch. I'd love to ask him some questions, and could I take him out to lunch? And he agreed, and he lived down here in Florida. And so I flew down and had lunch with him and knew the questions I wanted to ask him, right? Up front. And because this was someone who had done something similar to what I was trying to do back then and had 20 years worth of experience. And but only knowing what questions to ask would allow me to get the benefit of his experience, right?
Right.
And so I am constantly trying to look at my challenges and problems and obstacles and what have you, and reduce them down to questions that I'm trying to answer. It's just, I guess, the natural way I go about it, so that in my day-to-day, when things pop up, they are triggering ideas in my head to answer that question related to that, et cetera.
Yeah. As far as questions go, I think they're really useful, especially in goal setting, because goal setting has a bad rep. People don't know how to do it. People don't like to do it. Nobody likes to set a goal and then look at it a year later and say, "Oh, I didn't achieve it." So it doesn't feel good. But I've had issues with goal setting for the longest time, until I switched the way I asked the question. I basically kind of tricked myself into making goal setting effortless. So over the years, I've discovered, and I guess this is why I love being an entrepreneur, because it forces you to do a lot of self discovery. But over the years, I've discovered that I'm a negative driven person, that I'm way more motivated by fear, shame, embarrassment, pain, than benefits, big ideas, and things like that. I've been very it's been pretty much a theme for my life.
Yeah.
Only stuff like that would motivate me. And instead of asking myself, what would I like to achieve, or how, this is the question that never worked for me. How would I like my life to look like in 5 years or 1 year, or describe your perfect day? I wake up on the beach, and that's not me. It just doesn't work like that. Never worked for me. So I flipped the script, and I just asked, if I were to die in 5 years from today, what would be the biggest regret? The single biggest regret that I would have on my deathbed, the one that I would be so ashamed of, and that instantly puts things into perspective. It doesn't even feel like effort anymore at that point to write down your goals, because very quickly it comes from me. So getting the right question, instead of spending 90% of your time thinking of the right question to ask about any problem you're facing, versus trying to spend 90% of the time thinking of the answer. I think that's the switch that I'd recommend for anyone who's stuck right now. Because you phrase it right, it's almost half solved, really.
Yeah, for me, I go about it very differently. Although I find that interesting. I wrote it down. I'm gonna think about that. I've always been much more away from than towards, right? So away from pain versus towards pleasure. And and what I found was that it worked really well until it didn't. That I was afraid of being poor, and then I became more successful than I thought I would be, or afraid of being fat, and then ended up with like a six pack, and you know, and then it's very not motivating because that fear is now further away. It has less power.
Yeah.
And I went through like a midlife crisis in my early 40s around that, because like everything was better than I had hoped it would be, and yet I wasn't happy. And I didn't really know how to resolve that. And what I realized, not right away, unfortunately, was that I am and this is just for me personally. I feel most alive when I'm in pursuit, like
Yeah.
pursuit
Yeah.
of something that matters to me. And
Yeah.
so it's always important for me to be in pursuit, and that goals for me are much more about uh, setting the direction and getting me out of bed, and that the right goal does those two things. And that if I'm not getting out of bed excited to like accomplish something, then I have the wrong goal. Because what I realized, and I don't think this is like news to anyone, but I just had enough of it for myself, that I've achieved enough goals to know that like the happiness, that achievement of a goal, like it lasts for like a week or two, like,
Yeah.
and then it just kind of like fades into
Yeah.
the ordinary. And so if achieving the goal really doesn't provide that much at the end of the day, where you really get the benefit of the goal is if it's doing what it's supposed to be doing in the day to day, which is excite you, motivate you, get you to
Yeah.
take action. So
Yeah.
as long as a goal is doing that for me, it's the right goal, regardless of like, whether it aligns with everything else later on. Like that's less relevant to me nowadays. What's more relevant is, does it get me going? Does it put me into action? Does it put me into pursuit? And as long as I'm in pursuit, I'm happy. And I guess like just to circle back, right? Like even having like these other questions that I'm trying to answer that are just in the back of my head, operate as like kind of mini goals as I'm going through content, as I'm looking through my Evernote, like as I'm writing in my journal. They just kind of give more purpose to the things I'm doing, so that there's less likelihood of wandering around aimlessly, which is so easy to do nowadays because there's a million things that want to distract you, from social media to other people's priorities to, everything.